Hello everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today we're finishing my 2-year anniversary of Let's Talk About by continuing the countdown of my all-time favorite shows. Now this has been a countdown of my top 20 favorite TV shows, so if you didn't see part 1, check it out, the link in the little circled eye thing in the corner over there. But for everyone else, grab a snack because this got a lot longer than I thought it would. These are my top 10 favorite TV shows, starting with
Moving pictures, millions of pixels
number 10.
on screens.
Oh yeah. I'm your basic average girl, and I'm here to save the world. You can't stop me 'cause I'm impossible.
Kim Possible. Story time. I will never forget the first time I saw this show. When this came out, my sister and best friend were really into it, but after seeing a shot or two of Kim cheerleading or something, being the tomboy I was, I just assumed it was a dumb girly show and didn't get into it. It's basically what my initial reaction to MLP was, which may be odd in hindsight because I was so into the Powerpuff Girls, but and it wasn't until a few months later, over Easter weekend, it was the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep. And in 2003, there wasn't any on-demand or Netflix, so you had to settle for whatever was on TV. And pretty much the only channel that had age-appropriate content at 2 o'clock in the morning was the Disney Channel. So because I had nothing better to do, I gave Kim Possible a try. And I swear to you, to this day, I remember the first episode I saw, Royal Pains, and how it instantly hooked me. It was one of the coolest shows my 9-year-old eyes had seen, and after that, the three of us were obsessed with this show. We watched it all the time. We bought tons of the merchandise. We wanted to be Kim Possible. And looking back on it, it's very easy to see why. There was nothing quite like Kim Possible, especially like Kim herself. She was an expert fighter and was a total badass, but she was also a, well, basic teenage girl. She was still into fashion, boys, and being deeply insecure about literally everything. And that's a surprisingly difficult combination to pull off, but the way they did it with Kim should be studied. Ron was also a ton of fun, and even though he was technically the screw-up sidekick, I never felt annoyed by him, and I've never heard anyone complain about Kim bringing him along on missions. And not only did they have a great friendship, but their transition to being boyfriend and girlfriend was almost seamless, which again is really, really hard to pull off, but when it's done, it should be celebrated. And it wasn't just the characters, the adventures were always a ton of fun, filled with such creativity and absurdity to them that makes you really appreciate the people writing all of this. Remember the episode where they got trapped inside a cable box? Cause I sure do. The action sequences were exciting, the animation was fluid, and it has one of the best rogues galleries in an animated show to date. Kim Possible is remembered for a lot of things, that it broke gender norms while celebrating those genders, that the show the fans affected, having an outcry large enough to keep it going for another amazing season, that for a long time, it was the best and longest running Disney Channel cartoon there was. And it took a lot of competition to dethrone its reign, but as far as I'm concerned, Kim Possible deserved every ounce of praise it got. Now, how about releasing the rest of the show on DVD, Disney? Come on, you were doing so well.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels
Number
on
9.
screens. He's a phantom.
Danny Phantom. Favorite Nicktoon ever. I actually think it's because I was so obsessed with Kim Possible that I was so excited for this show when it was about to come out. Something just grabbed me about Danny Phantom. Nickelodeon hyped it up like mad, and I remember being really excited for the first episode. And from that point on, Danny Phantom was non-stop fun. And trust me, back in the 2000s, there were a lot of shows like this of ordinary teenagers in extraordinary circumstances, usually involving magic or superpowers. So you had to do a lot to stand out from the crowd. And Danny Phantom does this exceptionally. The best way I can think to describe it in a broad sense is that it takes something familiar and makes it unique. Danny in the wrong hands could have been an unbearable hero, but like Kim Possible, he acts like a typical put-upon teenage boy. But you still trust him to be a responsible hero when it counts. Whenever Danny does something reckless or irresponsible, you can at least understand where he's coming from. And he's always willing to fix any problem that comes his way, and it's so cool when he gets to kick some ghost butt. Sorry, I I really like the show. And even him having a secret identity has a more original twist on it. He doesn't really keep his secret for the safety of those around him, but for his own sake, because his parents are ghost hunters. You could totally understand why Danny wouldn't want to tell his parents about his powers, and it's really not until you grow up that you realize what a horrifying scenario this is for him. It's like if Peter Parker's guardian was J. Jonah Jameson, it would just cause problems. The rest of the characters are a great group and very memorable, and it has a cornucopia of distinct and sometimes even terrifying villains. The obvious standout being Vlad Plasmius. In fact, the rivalry between Vlad and Danny is one of my favorite hero-villain relationships ever. And while Danny Phantom is pretty episodic and can be watched in any order, you get a real sense of satisfaction from watching it in order. There's a fair amount of story progression of Danny becoming a much more experienced hero and old characters and plot points coming back that makes watching the entire series feel more satisfying. The animation even falls under the familiar yet unique category. Creator Butch Hartman definitely has a very recognizable style, but here it's much more vibrant, atmospheric, stylized. Even though Butch Hartman has produced 2 major cartoon shows since, this is probably the best looking show under his belt. Danny Phantom was just an awesome, really well put together show. Heck, I even liked the much maligned season 3. It even contained some of my favorite episodes of the entire show, except for Phantom Planet, which could have been better. But regardless, it's just so cool and comic booky. It's one of those shows you could put on at any time and be swept away in the excitement and fun of it all. And even if it wouldn't be a traditional response, if someone were to ask me who my favorite superhero was, this would be the answer I'd give them. Why? Because he's Danny Phantom.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 8.
Screens.
You never forget your first fandom war. For some, it's Star Wars versus Star Trek, or Marvel versus DC. But for me, it was Pokemon versus Digimon. Things have cooled down with this now, but back in 2000, you had to choose. You could not like both of these. And if you've been here for a while, you know what side I chose. But by the time I was 10, I actually managed to watch a bit of Digimon and became absolutely obsessed with it. But unlike Pokemon, the world and characters in Digimon change with each season, which makes each season its own show. So to make this entry interesting, I decided that I could only pick one. And that season is... Digimon Frontier. Just hear me out here. Look, I get it. Frontier is not exactly the most popular of the Digimon seasons, but I have no shame in saying that it's my favorite. And why is that? Well, this was the season that got me into Digimon. Like Impossible, I still remember distinctly how I saw this show and what episode it was exactly. It was just on my sister's TV when I turned it on, and since I didn't change the channel right away, I got invested in the show and thought it was really cool. But even beyond that, I do think Frontier is a great season of Digimon. Let's address the elephant in the room. Most seasons of Digimon have the main kids paired up with a Digimon partner to fight alongside them, but in Frontier, they become Digimon themselves through a process called spirit evolution. This is the turnoff for most fans, but I'm not against this. As much as I loved Pokemon, I like seeing a show where the kids themselves got in on the fight, and having it be for the sake of the entire digital world made it feel grander and more noble. I freaking love the look and fighting styles of the hybrid Digimon, and I really love this group of Digidestined. They were probably in the toughest situation since the original Digidestined. They didn't even have their families around. The trials and tribulations of being thrust into this strange world with no guide besides Bokomon, who was okay, and Neymon, who, as much as I love this season, is one of the most annoying creations in the whole of the Digimon franchise, and being given these new powers and responsibilities brings a lot of character conflict and growth. I really felt for these kids. The battles were awesome, the villains were threatening. I actually really like the lore for the digital world this time around, since it gives it a more ancient, mythical feel. Koichi is second only to Ken for the most tragic Sixth Ranger Digidestined, and I think that the risks it took, it pulled off, for the most part. After discovering Frontier, I did catch the other reruns of the first season playing at the time, and caught up with the other seasons and enjoyed them just as much, but there's a special place in my heart for Frontier. Is it the best season? No, that honor goes to Tamers, and I don't think many fans would disagree with me on that, but if Digimon Frontier wasn't so distinct, well-defined, and just awesome, I'm not sure if I ever would have given Digimon a chance. Say what you want about the season, but for that, this will always be my favorite adventure in the digital world.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 7. Sherlock. Now this is going to start what I'm going to call the detective trilogy. I've made it no secret that I love mystery stories, and a lot of that comes from the mystery and crime shows I've seen, but these 3 in particular. Now y'all know I love Sherlock Holmes already, and I have made a few videos on this show, but I don't know if I'm going to get flack for putting Sherlock on this list, especially this high. Ever since the 4th and possibly last season, Sherlock has developed this stigma towards it where some people just hate all of Sherlock now. That it's not very good, and never was to begin with. And Sherlock is flawed, don't get me wrong, but as a hardcore Sherlock Holmes fan, I freaking adore this show. When I heard that this existed, I was very nervous. A modern retelling of Sherlock Holmes did not seem like a good idea to me, and I found it on YouTube in parts during its first season, back when you could do that, before it came to the States and before it got as insanely popular as it did. So I really didn't have any expectations going in, but as I was watching it, I was blown away. None of the cast looks like the characters, we're in a completely new setting, but it still feels like Sherlock Holmes. There's a reason why Benedict Cumberbatch's career skyrocketed after the show came out, because he looks nothing like the character, but as soon as you hear him recite his deductions, I went, wow. That's Sherlock Holmes. The whole cast portrays these iconic roles marvelously. Aesthetically, they are drastic departures from what we might expect, but they embody their spirits almost perfectly while keeping a modern sensibility to them. Sometimes being even better, like with Mary. And say what you want about Stephen Moffat, but he and Mark Gatiss are definitely fans of Sherlock Holmes. Through the whole run, there's all sorts of Easter eggs and callbacks to even the most obscure Sherlock Holmes story, sprinkled in a way that makes it feel natural. And episodes like A Study in Pink, The Reichenbach Fall, The Lying Detective, and more do such a great job at using classic stories as framework for an episode and then making it their own. Not to mention that this is probably the most I've ever seen the Sherlock Holmes characters explored, going into areas that are characters and lives that I really enjoyed watching. I mean, we saw Sherlock's parents. That's amazing. Was this approach always a home run? No. But I never felt they were being disrespectful to the source material or deviating from it greatly to the point of being unrecognizable. Sherlock has its shortcomings. The final problem wasn't great, and I can understand on some level why people's perception of the show has turned sour lately, but I'm sorry, I just can't feel the same way. Sherlock brought the essence of what makes this iconic detective so memorable back into the public consciousness. I heard people read the books because of how much they enjoyed Sherlock. A while ago, I thought about doing a sort of retrospective series on Sherlock as a whole, but have been pretty hesitant since it seems like not as many people like it at all anymore. But maybe I'm wrong. If that's something you guys would like to see, let me know, because I cannot say enough about the world's greatest detective, even in modern day London.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number
on
6.
screens.
It's jungle out there, disorder and confusion everywhere.
Monk. Love, love, love this show. This is such a good show. And no one talks about it. This may seem off topic, but to any of my brony viewers, do you remember this segment from Ponies the Anthology 2?
It's jungle out there, disorder and confusion everywhere.
That was Monk's theme song, and judging from every reaction video I saw, no one knew what it was from. And I just couldn't believe that. So let's try to fix that. Okay, so if you've never seen this show, it's basically about a consulting detective with severe OCD. And this is one of those shows that's very funny and really clever, but can break your heart at a moment's notice, which clearly is a thing I really enjoy. As far as the mystery and the investigations are concerned, this is probably the best modern crime and mystery show I've seen. The deduction is clever and somewhat intricate, and this is one of those shows that is so much fun to try and solve along with it. The pieces are always always there for you and almost nothing is hidden from the audience, but it's so subtle and well crafted to get to the big conclusion that it makes sense why it takes someone as brilliant as Adrian Monk to come in and solve it all the time. The stories always have this excellent balance of intrigue, comedy, suspense, and character drama, and it's put together so well. The cast is another wonderful group, including having a major character replaced halfway through the show with little to no backlash, which is freaking remarkable. But the biggest heaps of praise I can give this show all connect to Adrian Monk. First, the handling of his OCD. Probably the best way to describe the portrayal is that they managed to make it funny, most of the times laugh out loud funny in fact, but not mean-spirited. While Monk is funny enough on his own, the best moments come from people's reactions to his very, very specific requirements and complicated ways of interacting with things. But one of the reasons Monk is such a good detective is because he sees the world in such a different way than pretty much everyone around him. So because it's such a big part of who he is, his friends are willing to accommodate him and help him out when he needs it. And anyone who seems ignorant or petty is portrayed as being ignorant or petty. You can understand people's frustrations at him sometimes, heck, even Monk is fully aware of it, but that's just who he is. And personally, I thought the show walked this tightrope pretty well. But Monk's biggest driving force through the course of the series is solving the case of his wife Trudy's murder. A case that, despite being called the world's greatest detective, he just can't solve. Tony Shalhoub won 3 Emmys for his role as Adrian Monk, and that is not enough. Every time there is a moment involving Trudy and the absolutely painful loss that he felt at losing the only woman who ever loved him, it's some of the most heartbreaking stuff I've ever seen on television. I don't even know how to put it in a broad sense. Each moment the show takes a turn into the dramatic, it's beautifully edited, phenomenally performed, and just so difficult to sit through, and yet you cannot get enough of it. And yes, this is another show on this list that has made me cry. Monk managed to be a little bit of everything and do it all so wonderfully. It's a show I wish I could make. It can be enjoyed on so many different levels that no matter what you're in the mood for, Monk will likely fulfill your needs. If you haven't seen it, pick it up and give it a try. I cannot recommend it enough. I recently rewatched the entire series through reruns, and it was even better than I remembered, which is apparently possible.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 5.
Screens.
The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock is great and all, and there have been many fine actors who have played the famous detective over the years, but Jeremy Brett is the definitive Sherlock Holmes, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise. Like, seriously, there are perfect casting choices, and then there's this. Was Jeremy Brett genetically engineered in a lab somewhere to play Sherlock Holmes? That's the only explanation I can find for how brilliant he is in this role. So, yeah, Jeremy Brett is great, but that's not the only reason why this is one of my favorite shows. If you want something that perfectly encapsulates what Sherlock Holmes is, the true spirit of those classic books and stories, bam! Right here. Every episode is an adaptation of one of Conan Doyle's stories, most of the time even quoting it directly. Sometimes that can be a problem, but here, it works. It works so well. Even episodes that deviate greatly from the source material still carry that same spirit. It still feels like Sherlock Holmes in foggy London solving a case from over 100 years ago. The true test of adaptation to me is if it understands and captures what made the original material so enjoyable and manages to make it its own thing. Very few pull this off, but The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes does this masterfully. And besides the phenomenal choice that was Jeremy Brett, this show had not one, but 2 Watsons. David Burke played him in the first season, but was replaced in the second season by Edward Hardwicke after the time skip from The Final Problem to The Empty House, which was a smart call, by the way. And both of them are just as excellent and respectful in the role. I could do a whole video on how difficult it has been to properly adapt Watson, so the fact that this show managed to get it right twice is astounding. And regardless of the actor, the chemistry between Holmes and Watson is the perfect blend of partners in deduction and disgruntled roommates, making time off from solving crimes just as entertaining as being on investigations, and paving the way for other adaptations to use the same dynamic. And I don't really bring stuff like this up, but the set design is amazing on this show. It definitely has the best Baker Street I've ever seen. It is very unfortunate that the show ended under the circumstances that it did, but I am so grateful that we got it for as long as we did. It is Sherlock Holmes. There's just no other way to put it. And if it isn't abundantly clear at this point, I kind of really like Sherlock Holmes. So this show is right up my alley.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number
on
4.
screens.
Doctor Who. If you had told me 5 years ago that Doctor Who would not only make it onto a list of my all-time favorite shows, but would have made it this high up, I would not have believed you. Mostly because, despite Doctor Who rapidly becoming popular in the States, I had barely heard of it until right before I watched it. If you saw my Doctor Who's Month videos a while back, you know why I gave this show a shot in the first place, but what made it stick with me? Well, the answer's pretty simple. When I get really into a movie or TV show or whatever, I can sometimes get obsessive over it. I revel in learning as much about the media I enjoy as I can, and delight in digging up the behind-the-scenes information, history behind the entertainment I consume, excessively. And then came Doctor Who. Doctor Who has one of the richest and most interesting histories of any pop culture franchise I have come across so far. At the time of recording this, there are over 800 episodes, and it's almost a bottomless well of creative storytelling and fascinating production history. It's everything my obsessive personality looks for. If the Twilight Zone focused around one character and one narrative, this would be it. Because the concept centers around being able to travel anywhere in time and space, the possibilities are literally endless, making this show able to tell such creative and powerful stories from every corner of the universe. Bouncing back and forth from having a great time and a fun adventure, to running for your life and scaring the crap out of you, to breaking your heart with a powerful moment from one of the characters. They explore a lot on this show, and it's almost always remarkable storytelling. But one of the interesting things about looking into Doctor Who's history is how they were able to work around their obstacles and almost make them iconic. Working with their limited budget back in the day and trying to terrify conceptually rather than visually. I mean, look at this thing. This is one of the most ridiculous looking designs I have ever seen. But then you see it do something like this, or this, or this, and I'm ready to piss my pants and run for the hills. And that mentality carried on even after the show improved from a production standpoint, and I think it's better for it. And the concept of the Doctor being able to regenerate, which enables them to replace him with a very different actor every few years, is one of the most brilliant workarounds I have ever seen in writing. Say what you want about each Doctor, but there have currently been over a dozen actors to play the main role, and they have all been wonderful, creating one of the most fascinating and complex characters on television. And just to get this out of the way, my favorite Doctor is Matt Smith. He was my first, he is everything I love about the character, and for me, he was absolutely brilliant. Has everything Doctor Who has done been a home run? Pfft. No, not even close. There are times when this show can get so absurd and so exasperating they can have you banging your head against a wall wondering why you even still bother with it. But honestly, after over 50 years, I'd be shocked if that didn't happen. But for every annoying or frustrating episode, there are hundreds of astounding stories, thousands of beautiful and emotional moments from the dozens of characters that have come and gone over the years, and the wonderful ongoing theme that everyone is important. That one person, no matter how insignificant they may seem, can change the universe. And that is everything I look for in my science fiction, and Doctor Who has that to offer, and so much more. And for anyone who wants to get into this show, but is intimidated by where to jump in, my advice is just ask a friend or a fan and trust their judgment, or find the debut of a Doctor or companion you've heard a lot about and work from there. There really is no perfect place to jump in at this point, but that just means there will be so much more to explore. In the words of my favorite Doctor,
All of time and space, everything that ever happened or ever will. Where do you want to start? Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number
on
3.
screens.
Water. Earth. Fire. Air.
Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of
Long
Korra.
ago.
I'm sorry, I couldn't separate these two. And you might be thinking, but Kate, I thought you said Danny Phantom was your favorite Nicktoon. How could Avatar be higher on the list? Well, it's very simple. Avatar isn't a Nicktoon. It can't be. It's so magnificent it would transcend whatever network it aired on. I mean, man, where do you even begin with this one? I mean, I saw this show at the young, impressionable age of 20. Okay, I have a bit of a confession. I actually didn't see this show when it first came out. It wasn't through a lack of interest, it was just something I never got around to. I do remember Nick advertising the hell out of it, which is a bit ironic given what happened later, but anyway. Finally, I took the plunge and watched it, and I was instantly hooked. Aside from the epic storytelling, the intricate and fascinating world building, the multitude of multi-dimensional characters around every corner, the stunning animation, intense action scenes, remarkable voice work, gorgeous score, mature and daring themes, especially for a show on Nickelodeon, and so much more, Avatar is one of those once-in-a-generation shows. I honestly don't believe in a perfect story, that there are perfect movies or TV shows out there, but while Avatar isn't a perfect show, it's pretty damn close. Admittedly, there were a few loose ends that I wish were tied up by the end. And I don't mean the really infamous one that later got its own comic. I mean the less talked about one that later got its own comic. It's one of those shows I would have no trouble recommending to anyone, because I think most people could find something to enjoy in it. It's the animated equivalent of Game of Thrones. So massive and fantastical, but also relatable and down to earth. I can't even really say much more without going into specifics. It's just such a miraculous experience of a show. Is its sequel series, The Legend of Korra, as good? No. Does that make it bad? Absolutely not. Despite the constant interfering by Nickelodeon and the showrunners adding in things that weren't as well received as they might have hoped, The Legend of Korra was still a very, very impressive and ambitious show, tackling big ideas like the original did, but instead of having one continuous threat, there are multiple villains that divide the show into different arcs, while still maintaining the continuous theme of balance. It would have been so easy to just try and tell the same story again, but they took a different direction and worked well with what opportunities they were given. Plus, I'm a big fan of next generation stories. I always like seeing how a world would evolve after Happily Ever After, and I thought what they did with the world of Avatar was really cool and interesting. The characters aren't as solid as Avatar's, but I still really enjoyed them, especially the direction they took with Korra. The animation is still phenomenal, the voice cast is absolutely excellent, and the way they evolved the story over time felt like a natural progression to me. There must have been some substance to it, because there was enough there to get me to start Let's Talk About in the first place. It does show how much of a lightning in a bottle thing the original series was, because it couldn't even be duplicated in full by the same people. But I think people are doing a bit of a disservice by dismissing The Legend of Korra, which is why I lumped these two together in one spot. The Avatar universe has some of the most remarkable, beautifully crafted moments of storytelling in animation history. While it's not my favorite, it's probably the best show on this list.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number
on
2.
screens.
Give me some love, time in a dream. Give me the hope to run out of steam.
Community. You know, because I've seen and loved so many shows, I could never really decide on a favorite. I honestly can't remember calling any show my favorite growing up, but then I saw Community. Aside from the number one choice, this was one of those times where I had one of those moments where I had to ask, was this show made specifically for me? Community has a lot going for it, not the least of which being created by the same man who would go on to co-create Rick and Morty, Dan Harmon, but the thing that attached me to Community the most was how well it used pop culture references and genre-specific parody. This is one of the most commonly mishandled forms of comedy, thinking it can get away with not being very clever just because it's a thing the audience has heard of. So when it can be pulled off with finesse, it should be celebrated. And Community pulls this off with literally every other episode. Community indulged in every genre out there. You name it. Crime dramas, science fiction, westerns, anime, video games, stop motion animation, 80s animation, puppetry, conspiracy thrillers, Dungeons and Dragons, musicals, documentaries, comic books, and so many others. But here's the brilliant thing about Community. It doesn't immerse itself in a genre or a particular style of another property just for the sake of recognized humor, or most of the time, not even for the sake of parody. It was always for the benefit of the story or the characters. Taking these characters through fantastic journeys in as ordinary a way as possible to have them escape from their problem and in the end, solve it. Sure, it was always funny and creative, and the accuracy as far as production value goes was really damn impressive, but it always had a point. The show did this because it would have something to say. Maybe one of the characters is having a midlife crisis, or trying to keep the group together after they graduate, or trying to find their place in an environment that is changing drastically but has been their main source of comfort and the only place they fit in for years. In a way, it shows that while it's not healthy to completely lose yourself in escapism, and it does show that as well, there is something to be gained in it. When a story has something to say, which most do, it can change someone's outlook on the world, help them through a tough time, and even bring people together. In many ways, fiction influences reality, and nowhere is that more obvious than Community. The original Greendale 7 were absolutely marvelous together, carrying the weight of the show on their shoulders like it was air. The writing was absolutely brilliant, flowing excellently between comedy and drama, sometimes in the same line of dialogue, and it has one of my favorite characters of any show ever in the form of Abed. Unfortunately, Community may have been too smart for its own good. It had a hard time finding a place on NBC during its run. After a while, cast members left, Dan Harmon left for a season, and the constant butting in from the network that even forced the show to go to a completely different platform for its promised 6th and final season. I think the show held up really well under the circumstances, but even they couldn't hide all of the cracks on screen. But even though Community didn't get the best treatment and an okay send-off, I do hope the one-off joke that became an anthem and promise to fans is fulfilled one day and we get a Community movie. Where is the Kickstarter for that?
Moving pictures.
Before we get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions because, like I said, I watch a lot of TV, and I felt bad for leaving a lot of these off. But with all of that now out of the way, let's get to the top of the list.
More than any one image.
And my number 1 favorite show of all time is, oh, who are we kidding? You know it's Gravity Falls. Sorry if that was a bit direct, but my regular viewers knew this was topping the list, so sorry if that killed tension building up to this, but honestly, it couldn't have been any other for me. Like Community, as this show went on, I just had to keep asking myself, was this show made specifically for me? Because it has almost everything I look for in a TV show. A heavy emphasis on continuity and intriguing ongoing mysteries? Check. An excellent expressive and creative animation style and character and background designs that create a unique and vibrant world? Check. Snappy, clever dialogue with witty humor making even jokes I don't normally care for get a laugh out of me? Check. A well-rounded mythology creating a down-to-earth fantasy environment? Check. An eclectic cast of characters who are well-defined, defy expectations, evolve as the story goes on, and have incredible hidden depth to them? That's a big fat check. Really, the only thing it's missing is constant spontaneous musical numbers, but we can forgive that. Gravity Falls is just so well crafted. From episode 1, it immediately sets up a huge amount of potential and the promise of a grand and even personal story given how the first episode ends, and it delivers remarkably on that promise. Any show can start off with a promising premise, heck, most shows these days do, but it takes a lot of talent and perception to actually follow through on that promise. And Gravity Falls is one of the very few out there that pull that off. When the show finally ended, it was honestly the most satisfied I have ever been with a series finale. Like Avatar, there was a loose end or two, but it still felt complete to me. I could go on for hours about everything that I adore about this show, and on some level I have, but I think that's just it. Gravity Falls is filled with so many details, so many ciphers hinting at future events, so many subtle moments between characters through animation and performance, so many mind-blowing moments that when you go back and watch previous episodes, you realize there were hints, causing you to be even more observant with future episodes. It's a show that asks you to form a relationship with it, and about halfway through, I did, in more ways than one. Community is right up my alley, Avatar is a masterpiece, Doctor Who is iconic, but Gravity Falls remains my favorite show, not only because of the connection I made with the show itself, but how that connected me to others. Because Gravity Falls had so much to offer, there was always something to talk about, and even after the show ended, there was so much potential for what could have happened afterwards, which made it very, very easy to talk about this show with other people. So far, every friend I have made over the internet has been made through a connection with Gravity Falls. Could that have happened with any other show on this list? Sure. but it didn't. Gravity Falls brought out such passion and excitement in me that was just begging to be shared with others. It dominated this channel when it started and was the focus of my first video review after all. And the fact that that same love for this bizarre little show gave me a connection to so many wonderful people who, over the past couple of years, have become dear friends means more to me than any narrative imperfections or forgotten characters ever will. Gravity Falls is a fun, exciting, beautifully put together show in its own right, and I could still talk about it for hours. Even episodes I don't love have their redeeming qualities. But for giving me people who also want to talk about it and so much else makes it my all-time favorite show. Whatever shows come in the future, it's going to take a lot to top that. And it's the perfect way to cap off this anniversary. Would I be doing this 2 years later if I hadn't made those connections? I don't know, maybe. But it wouldn't be nearly as fulfilling. This channel has grown a lot over the past year. There are over 100 more of you than there were last year. That's incredible. Whether you're a friend, subscriber, or someone just randomly clicking on this video for one reason or another, thank you all so much for a great ride so far. There will be more to come in the future, and because of how much you guys respond to these videos, it encourages me to hopefully make each new video even better. In the meantime, I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree with my list? What are some of your favorite shows? And more importantly, why do you love them? Let me know, because that's why the series is called Let's Talk About. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.